Do you think the ANC or Ramaphosa specifically, they have the time to right the ship, as it were, to make the changes necessary for them to actually recuperate in 2024, or is it
Yeah.
already over?
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty much over. I think they do have the time, and I think if you have a strong leader, and I think Ramaphosa is quite a weak leader, we've spoken about this before, for various reasons. I think it's including his personality, but for other reasons as well. And I just don't think that he will be able to turn this around. I think the ANC is going to get below 50. The ANC is on a downward spiral. We've seen that. There is enough time to turn this around, but I just don't think that the current political leadership has it in them to turn it around, firstly. And secondly, I don't think they will be allowed to turn this around. Remember, the ANC and everything around that is one massive patronage. It's one huge criminal organization that is simply feeding off the state. And all of those people, and that includes everybody, politicians, people working for a state, people getting contracts from the state, everybody. There are so many people that will be affected if the president and, of course, the political leadership do want to make a difference here, that it's just not possible. I just can't see how they're going to do that. Because what you need to do, you have to cut back on spending on civil servants. They're going to get angry. You have to go and check at all these contracts, and people are going to get angry. We saw what happened to Eskom. People are sabotaging Eskom. That sort of thing will keep on happening if you really want to make a difference. And I just don't think they've got the stomach to do that.
Dawie, what do you think will happen? Okay, let's say the ANC falls below 50% in 2024. What do you think will happen in the financial markets in South Africa? Do you think there will be a similar situation, what happened in the United States, where the Dow dropped dramatically when Trump won in 2016, and then it climbed, it skyrocketed? Do you think there will be a similar situation in South Africa where the rand will briefly weaken and then skyrocket, strengthen?
Yeah, I don't think we can compare South Africa to the United States for a number of reasons. We can go through those reasons if you want to, but what is likely to happen, I think, if the ANC falls below 50%, I think the financial markets will see that as a positive sign. I think the rand will probably weaken at first because it means change, and the financial markets do not like change. But soon thereafter, depending, of course, what happens, depending on what sort of coalitions will be put together and whether there's going to be a coalition and so on. But depending on that, the rand could either stay weaker, or the financial markets, for that matter, can stay weaker, or it can come back, depending on what happens thereafter. So the initial reaction could be uncertainty, and uncertainty is not good for financial markets. There's something else, however, that's very important and quite positive when you talk about South Africa, and that's the nature of our financial markets. Our financial markets are very, very well regulated, very liquid, and very much integrated with the rest of the world. In fact, our financial markets can be compared to the best in the world. So in practice, quite often, it doesn't really matter who's in charge of government, really, as long as I can buy government bonds and sell it quickly. I don't really care what's going on. And in fact, the worse the government is, the more opportunity there is to get quite a nice yield in the South African financial markets. Come in, take a quick bite out of the apple and run out again because of the liquidity in the financial markets and the depth of the South African financial markets. So in a perverse kind of way, it is quite possible that even a bad government can actually lead to a temporary strength in things like, for example, the exchange rate of the currency, depending where you start, of course. So if the rand weakens, argument's sake, to say 20 rand to the US dollar, and the bonds weaken to 12% in 2 years' time, that could be a sign for foreigners to come in and say, listen, the currency is overdone, the yields are very juicy, let's see if we can buy a couple of bonds here and pick up a couple of extra points on our investments and so on. So that's quite possible. So even in a bad environment, the financial markets can actually strengthen. But over time, eventually financial markets will return to their underlying fundamentals, and the wrong government, and especially if we have more of the ANC is a wrong government, we don't want their policies, more of the same will happen. And that means a continuation of a weak currency, a continuation of relatively high yields on the bond market because of the risk involved and all that. So the point I want to make is that if we stay on this trajectory, we will have more of the same, and more of the same means weaker growth and everything that goes with it.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the short-term prospects will be very uncertain, but long-term, as long as the ANC stays in power, it's not going to.
It could even let's say there's a coalition between the ANC and the EFF, for example. Now, that's not going to be nice. The markets are not going to like that, because not only is it uncertainty, but it's also the move in the wrong direction. But like I've said, in the short term, anything is quite possible. It's quite possible that the markets can rally because of the valuations and so on, and opportunities that foreigners may see in our market. And there are still quite a lot of opportunities. I mean, look at the currency where it is at the moment. It is a weak currency. The bond yields are very, very attractive. And even when things are dull, places falling apart, there are opportunities on South Africa's financial markets. And in fact, I am actually, as a rule, quite bullish on, especially on our bond market, not necessarily on equities, but the bond market really provides wonderful opportunities, sure, at least in the short term, for somebody like what I've said, to take a quick bite out of that.
Yeah, no, it might be an ANC EFF coalition. It's definitely not going to be an Action SA DA coalition, because they don't want to shake each other's hands.
Well, who knows? Who knows? Maybe it could. Who knows? It's quite possible. It's quite possible that there could be another kind, a minority kind of coalition. It's possible. If the EFF, and they've done this at the municipality level, where they say, listen, I'm not going to support anybody, and they voted for somebody else as long as the ANC is kept out, kind of thing. And that's quite possible on the national level as well. So don't take it as a given that it's not going to be a DA-led kind of government. It's unlikely, but it's not impossible.
To a certain degree, I was joking that Mashaba and Zille doesn't want to shake hands. But Dawie, okay, these might be stupid questions, but why is the Rand so important in South Africa in terms of political analysis? For example, you always look at the Dow when a political event happens in the United States, but in South Africa, it's the Rand. It's not the JSE that's the most affected. Is that a wrong analysis, or is there something there?
No. I think there's value in that. I think there are three major markets to look at. The first one is the equity market. Everybody knows the equity market is the JSE. And in the case of South Africa, the locally listed companies, they earn more than 60% of their revenue abroad, not even in South Africa. So it doesn't matter what happens in South Africa, their profitability will only be affected to a lesser extent than many other companies listed internationally. So I think that is a very important reason. Another reason has to do with the valuation on the local and international markets. Our equity market is quite cheap, while in many instances, like for example, the US, their equity market is actually quite rich. And when markets are a little bit overvalued, then they tend to be a little bit jittery. And when something happens, they tend to move correct quite quickly. So I think that's perhaps not a very good gauge to measure South Africa's underlying sentiment, so to speak. Another market that you can look at certainly is the Rand, the Forex market. And South Africa's Rand is a very highly traded currency. Of the small countries in the world, it's probably the most liquid currency in the world. And I mentioned that our financial markets are very well regulated and quite liquid. So the currency is all over the place, but the Rand is always an undervalued currency. The question is only how much undervalued. And also keep in mind that we are pretty much price takers when it comes to, for example, the Fed making changes to monetary policy. When they increase interest rates, it's pretty much a given that the Rand is going to weaken because the dollar is going to go up. So, but the point I'm trying to make is that everything in the world is basically somehow measured against the US dollar. And then the third market that I actually think is a much better market to look to analyze and to understand, and that's the bond market in South Africa and abroad. Because the bond market people are not very much aware of the bond market, people don't understand the bond market, or also known as the capital market. I prefer to call it the capital market. And the capital market I think it's the cleverest of all the markets, The capital market includes things like, for example, inflation expectations. It includes things like, for example, interest rates differentials and interest rates expectations. It also includes things like, for example, economic growth and all that. So it's really a complicated market, and the bond market is far better and more forward-looking than any one of these other markets. And the bond market is part of the reason, by the way, why I'm not too concerned about international inflation, because the bond market is telling me that inflation is only temporary internationally. And in the case of South Africa, there are some other factors at play, of course, as well. But the bond market is a place that I would look at if I want to see how the markets are really reacting to things like, for example, a change in policy and a change in government.